Good evening, everybody. It is Wednesday, September 6th at 6:30 p.m. and I wanted to welcome everyone here and everyone online to the regular meeting of the Larkspur City Council. Sasha, could we please get a roll call?
Councilmember Farrell?
Here.
Councilmember Way?
Here.
Vice Mayor Candler?
I am here.
Mayor Paul?
Here, thank you. And if you're able to rise, please do so, and we'll do our Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. So our next item, number 2 on the agenda, is public comment, and that's for anything that's not agendized tonight. So if it's on the agenda, then maybe save it for that time. And this is for other items, so we can get some input from you. And if you're here and want to say something, please come up to the mic. Just tell us your name and where you live, and you have a couple minutes.
Hello. My name's Rob Webb. I'm a 13-year resident of Larkspur. I live over behind Dark Park. Got 2 kids in the public school system and love it. One of which was taught by Swisher in the back there. Fantastic. And I am worried about homelessness, like many in the world today. Particularly worried about our town and what might happen here. So I'm not a lawyer. I did go to law school, and I have been paying attention to what's been happening in the cities around us. And 3 of our neighbors have been sued by unionized homeless populations in the last 2 years. It's Novato, San Rafael, and Sausalito. And in each of those instances, the city was sued after a homeless population moved into a public space, and the city tried to react and pass an ordinance, and they ran against the District 9 ruling that it's not illegal to be homeless. You can't move people unless there's a place that's a good spot for them to go to. So right now, Larkspur is lucky. We don't have homeless camps in Town Park or Piper Park or Dark Park or Joe Wag, but we very well could, and I would be willing to bet in the next 12 to 24 months we will. And so I would love to know what our strategy is, if we have one, or if we're just crossing our fingers and hoping that it doesn't pop up. And if there's a place for me to learn about what the strategy is, I'd love to learn more about it. So far, again, everything is pretty great. We do have some folks living out in, I guess, the grassy zone past the malls. But I also think that what we're doing on Alicio is awesome, but I'm guessing that's not going to help us. If we have a homeless camp pop up in a public park, they're not going to be able to go live in Alicio. That's a very structured situation. That's not an option for somebody who just moves into a public park. So we're kind of actually maybe stuck in a pickle, and it might be a good idea to pass an ordinance before we have a homeless population that has moved into one of our parks, because they're not there to move, and they then won't unionize and sue us. And the settlements on these lawsuits are tremendous. Like it's a bad problem. It's happening all around us. So yeah, that's my public comment. And if there's anything I can do to learn more, I'd love to.
Great, thank you, Rob. All right, next public comment, please.
I have something that's related to biodiversity. Should I wait after the initiative? Yeah.
That's on the agenda.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next public comment, yeah.
Hello, my name is Marjan Abadian, and
there you go.
Thank you. My name is Marjan Abadian. I've been resident of 325 Yellow Pass since 1998. And right now, our drainage of myself and 3 other neighbors, it goes to a city pipe that after project that has been ratified by the city, it's supposed to be taken away, i.e. we don't have any other way of basically draining our rainwater. I try to find out what is a way for me to discuss this matter. I discussed it with Honorable Mr. Schwartz, and he's telling me that I cannot contact any city member just because there's going to be, if I do, then they have to recuse themselves. So I don't know how should I proceed really, and to bring to the attention of at least the redirection of the project has happened. We are requesting to stop the closing of that pipe, especially that we have given such a short notice as 3 months to deal with this problem since the project has started 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Marja.
Can I just ask a clarifying question about that? Not in this specific instance, but how a process like this may, similar to this, may proceed so that the council needs to not be involved until a certain section of time.
Anyone who has a dispute with the city, a prior decision of the staff or the council has a number of administrative remedies available to them that have to be exhausted. Based on how they exhaust those remedies, their option may place them in front of the city council or it may place them in a court of law. I have given the speaker quite a bit of information about how to exhaust her administrative remedies.
Okay. So in other words, if it comes to us, if we have had conversation, then we would have to recuse ourselves.
Potentially, it's hard to answer that question without knowing exactly what the conversations were. But once somebody's in dispute with the city, the potential that you're going to need to sit and adjudicate the situation does tend to suggest that the best course of action is for you to allow the administrative process to play out.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, next comment.
Good evening. Wearing a hat here. It says Marin City. Town, Marin City, California, Southern Marin. I'm born and raised there. I have something in the LA Times. Stop minor traffic stops. They are an excuse to randomly search cars and can turn deadly. LA Times recently. In Marin City, we've been stopped for generations, for decades, for minor traffic infractions. Pulled over, harassed, pulled out of the car, handcuffed. You guys, majority white, 99% of you I think are white. You can drive around, not be harassed for at all in your cars for any reason. Today, there's a new phenomenon happening where these Porsche, Land Rovers, Teslas that you all drive, you have no front license plate. I sat outside, that's an infraction. You're not being pulled over for. I sat outside today before this meeting. I saw dozens of cars drive by with no front license plate. Driving while white. You don't get pulled over. You don't get harassed. It's a reality. I'm born and raised here. Many of my brothers have been harassed by cops for that very reason. Again, I'll repeat, today and every day when I'm out enjoying the beautiful streets of Marin, I see dozens and dozens of white people driving per half hour with no front license plate. In the parking lot behind us, or in front of me right now, it's a few cars with no front license plate. When you drive out of here, you won't get pulled over, I guarantee it. What I'm saying to you is, we're gonna keep track ourselves and keep making complaints. At some point, you're gonna be sued because you're gonna ignore this issue. You're gonna gloss over it, act like it doesn't matter, you don't care, but it happens every day. For you, it happens on no day because you don't get pulled over. You don't get harassed for having no front license plate on your big fancy new cars. Teslas, Porsche, Land Rover, Range Rover. There's a few out front right now, as I just said. So we're tracking this. Enjoy your ride without being pulled over. We get pulled over. Black brothers, my brothers, me. It happens daily still. LA Times recently. The only way to do it, not talk about it. Talking does no good. You ignore us. We must come forward in the court of law. Central Marin's part of this jurisdiction. I know it used to be Twin Cities when we grew up. Twin Cities was horrid towards us. Now, Central Marin, has things changed? I don't know. But according to you, you guys get the pass though. Driving while white, no front license plate. Enjoy.
Thank you. All right, any other public comments? Sasha, do we have anyone on Zoom who wants to make public comment? Okay. Yep, please.
James Holmes, Larkspur. Apropos of the speaker who referenced the homeless situation, I regretfully predict that there will be a homeless encampment in the little park next to the South Alicio as folks go to visit their friends who are staying there. But I wonder if the council saw the article in the Independent Journal, I believe it was on Saturday, regarding the controversy about the Serenity and other similar so-called affordable housing, which was set up with bonds issued in connection with a JUA or JPA, and I believe Larkspur is a part of that, which is why there is Serenity. And that was previously, those Serenity and similar developments were previously the subject of some very severe criticism in the business press, including, I believe, Bloomberg and Forbes, and I can make that available to any council member who's interested. But in any event, now it turns out that not only is the criticism, in addition to the criticism provided in the business press, that the fees by the promoters vastly exceed any benefits to the tenants. Now it turns out that according to the IJ article, the tenants are facing high tax liabilities because of a technical issue which the promoters failed to adequately investigate and obtain regulatory clearance regarding. And of course, there probably wasn't disclosure to the bondholders either in the prospectuses. But in any event, I think this is something to be aware of, and hopefully no more of these deals will be done in Larkspur as long as the tax issues are holding out, and maybe Larkspur should consider getting out of this JUA or JPA, because it does appear that the controversies exceed the benefits. Thank you.
Great, thank you, James. Any other comments, Sasha? Or... Okay. City Manager, please.
Mr. Mayor, you had two public comments concerned about activity in the park. I just thought it'd be helpful to let folks know that under the Larkspur Municipal Code, it's actually unlawful to be in a park outside of daylight hours, and basically says in our codes, sunset to sundown, and you can only be in a park with the express permission of the city manager's designee, so only on basically a city-sponsored event. So in terms of any activity that may or may not occur at night in the park, it would be unlawful because you shouldn't be there.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Okay, so it looks like we're done with public comment. I don't see any last calls. And I wanted to move on to item number 3, which is presentations and proclamations. And we do have one tonight. This is a proclamation declaring Biodiversity Day in Larkspur. And I just want to say a couple words, and I won't read the whole, I'll just read a short version because I think we have a longer meeting tonight. But I was, someone brought this issue to my attention, and I felt very strongly about it. And I feel like we've got a emergency climate action plan, and we're working on various issues like sea level rise, and I think biodiversity doesn't really get as much attention. So the purpose of this was really just to raise awareness. And additionally, I was really surprised to see how many different agencies are working on this. The Marin Wildfire Prevention Agency has their environmentally sound practices. The county parks has a biodiversity division or staff that work on that issue. There's Audubon, there's Marin Conservation, and the county itself has read this proclamation. So we often have so many people doing, the same thing. It's good to, see that we're all moving the same direction. So I'll just read a few sentences here in short. Whereas the United Nations has declared that biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution are the three major threats to global sustainability. And whereas biodiversity loss is happening at all levels and shrinking of local marine populations of many plants and animals is also occurring. And whereas the County of Marin in 2021 recognized the importance of these actions and established the biodiversity corridor, and there's a link there which is got a lot of information. And whereas many local efforts are underway to protect, enhance, and restore populations of native species within the city of Larkspur, and whereas the city of Larkspur supports local, regional, and global efforts to support biodiversity, now therefore be it resolved that the city of Larkspur officially joins the celebration of September 7th tomorrow as California Biodiversity Day and encourages all its residents and employees do all they can to support biodiversity and thus improve the well-being of humans and our environment. So anyway, I appreciate your attention on this. And again, there's a lot of great info out there. There's some great links. And if there aren't any thoughts or questions, then we can move on to the next item. Oh, okay. I guess if we have some comments, I wasn't sure how we do that with proclamations, but please come on up.
Hi, I'm Laura Lovett, longtime resident of Larkspur, Marin Chapter, California Native Plant Society, one of the many groups working for biodiversity. I want to be the first to congratulate you. I like living in a town that has a biodiversity initiative. And I'm your guerrilla gardener. I have been planting native plants around town for 7 or 8 years now. And this spring we did the police station garden. Looks quite beautiful, much better than thistles. And in the end of September, we're doing the downtown parking lot, among other things. And these are all native plants. And the issue with biodiversity is that native creatures need native plants. They don't look at imported plants as food. So they starve to death, even though there's a lot of greenery around them. So those two things really go hand in hand. And of course, plants are the bottom of the food chain and they support all of us that are on top of that. So that's been my aim in planting beautiful, I say maintained, I hope, native plant gardens around the city. Of course, there's one big parcel that's still sitting empty. So we have lots of hope for the library parcel, that it will be the ultimate example of how to have a biodiverse, low water, low maintenance, carbon neutral sanctuary around a beautiful library. And I'm happy to give you a presentation on what that might be and how it might look. And also we're here to support you and help you if you don't really know who to contact, who does that landscaping, where to get plants, all those kinds of things. We are here to be of help.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you for your work. And yes, please.
Laura, that's great. We've met before many years ago when we were first doing library 2.0 or 1.0. But have you been in contact with the Commons Foundation? Because they are working on a fundraising for the landscape.
Oh, we have.
Good.
And we've been in touch with the city manager and we basically shut down.
Oh, well, we're working on a process. So
okay.
Thanks for being here.
We want to have input before the landscape architect is hired.
Okay.
This is somewhat different kind of landscaping than the average person might know how to do. Thank you for that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for your comments. Next comment, please.
Hi, my name is Dana Swisher. I am also a longtime resident of Larkspur, over almost 30 years, and also a teacher at Neil Cummins Elementary. I recently took over direction of the school garden with an emphasis on teaching the kids about ecology and the importance of biodiversity. So looking over the fence, I noticed that the land bordering our fence, the Corte Madera land, was just sort of, I'd say, ignored. It's kind of fallow, basically had invasive European grasses and fennel. And I thought, well, gosh, you know, we've done so much in our own garden. We could do so much more with the town land. And luckily, the public works people there and the city council supported my efforts. And we have created a beautiful biodiverse habitat garden with native plants. And can't tell you how many people walk by there and just say how much they love it. I see families stopping and reading the signs and teaching their kids. And so very gratifying. So I'm super excited that you guys are considering a proclamation for the town of Larkspur, my town. Very exciting. And I'm happy to also let you know that I also founded a nonprofit this year called Refugia Marin, which is basically creating thriving habitat gardens for pollinators and other wildlife. And as it turns out, humans too. And we are in talks with Point Blue Conservation to get over $100,000 grant to re-landscape the Larkspur School District campuses. And our first priority is the front of Hall School, which would speak directly to the Larkspur Library and talk to Laura's Garden over at the police station and create corridors for wildlife. So vote yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Dana. And as a Neil Cummins parent, thank you double. Sandy, hi.
Hi, I'm Sandy Goldman, also a Larkspur resident. Tonight I'm speaking as the president of Friends of Corte Madera Creek Watershed. We are big fans of biodiversity. A biodiverse habitat supported by native plants contributes to the health not only of animals, but of us, the people who live here. It's really important to have a healthy environment. And that extends, in my view, to the management of water, what we do with our stormwater, how we use water for irrigation. And if you have a native plant garden, you can use water more wisely. And if it's designed properly, you can be infiltrating water instead of having it run off and contribute to flooding. It gets cleaned when it's infiltrated through the healthy soil that we hope the native plants are growing in, and improves the water quality in the creek in San Francisco Bay. So there's just a host of benefits of creating a biodiverse base habitat. The library site on Rose Lane provides the city with an absolutely once in a lifetime opportunity to provide a really outstanding example of how to design landscaping for the future when we will have more floods, more droughts. I can't urge you enough to make sure that the firm that's hired has landscapers who will use mostly native plants. I think the goal is a minimum of 70% natives to have a robust, biodiverse habitat. So you will be making a contribution to a much better Larkspur if you can follow through on that. And this is a wonderful step. So thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Council, for supporting biodiversity. It's much appreciated.
Great, and thank you, Sandy. Hey, anybody else? Okay, great. Let's invite them in. Paul, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Paul De Silva, and I'm a long-term resident of Larkspur, as well as former professor and current trustee of the College of Marin. Mayor Paulson and members of the councils, thank you so much for your work on the Larkspur Biodiversity Day Proclamation. It brings the city of Larkspur into alignment with governments worldwide that are striving to meet the important challenge of biodiversity loss. I wholeheartedly support this work, and I'm willing to do whatever I can to help it move forward. The next steps needed are actions to implement the resolution. These fall into three main categories: research and education, protection of existing biodiversity, and restoration of biodiversity where it has been lost. Many suggestions for specific actions are contained in the United Nations Handbook for the City Biodiversity Index. This has stimulated numerous local governments to join in wonderful and creative efforts to move forward with actions from a wide menu of possibilities, and also to track their progress and their projects as the years pass. One example of a key action already started in Larkspur is the type you just have heard about from the other speakers, the restoration of native plant species as a foundation for all other species and ecosystems. Congratulations. I hope we can all move forward together.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. All right. And if there are no other comments, then we'll move on to the consent calendar. So we have 4 items tonight, and I wanted to first ask if the council wanted to pull any item from the consent calendar.
I wanted to pull 4.3.
Okay, so 4.3, and then anybody else on the council? Okay, and anybody in the public want to pull any item or discuss any item on the consent calendar? Okay, so with that, I will move that we pass 4.1, 4.2, and 4.4.
I will second that motion.
Okay, Sasha, can we get a roll call?
Councilmember Carroll?
Yes.
Councilmember Way?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Campbell?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Okay, so we'll come back to 4.3, and I guess we can maybe start with a staff report, or if Councilmember Carroll wants to open it up, either way.
Staff's prepared to make a presentation.
Okay, so yeah,
Mr. Mayor.
great. Then let's hear from the staff, please. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the public. My name is Julian Skinner. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Larkspur. We have a presentation tonight on this agenda item, which is we're asking tonight that you adopt the plans and specifications for the Old Redwood Highway multi-use purpose path, which is part of the north-south greenway. So I have a brief presentation tonight on the plans that we're asking you to adopt, as well as the north-south, a little bit of history on the north-south greenway and overview as well. 2 photos here from recently completed sections of the north-south greenway. On the left is the over crossing of Easter Francis Drake. And then on the right is the multi-use path that goes over the Corte Madera Creek that the project you're asked to approve tonight would connect to. Here's a location map on the left. This is the overall north-south greenway throughout Marin County. It goes from Sausalito all the way up to the county boundary, and then the little rectangle there is blown up on the right, and that's the section where the subject project is contained. It's a gap closure. As you look at the overall on the left, there's some sections of the north-south greenway that have been complete and some that are incomplete. And so the project before you tonight is to complete a gap in the north-south greenway. On the right, this is the blow up. It shows the area of Larkspur that's just south of the Corte Madera Creek. Running right down the middle of the slide is US Highway 101. And the segments we're looking at are on the east side of 101. Now I'm flipping that last slide sideways. So north is pointing to the right of the slide, and you're looking at an overview of the north-south greenway segments in the vicinity of Larkspur, Corte Madera, and the county of Marin. The north-south greenway gap projects in our area were split into a north and a south component. This was initially funded by Regional Measure 2, which was toll funds some years ago. And so the first phase of this recent project funded by the toll funds was the recently completed path that goes over Corte Madera Creek that Caltrans just completed. The subject project of tonight's request for approval is a continuation of that along Old Redwood Highway that would go from where the recently completed overcrossing touches down near Old Redwood Highway down to the pedestrian overcrossing that's on Old Redwood Highway around Industrial and crosses over US 101 towards the west. Those are referred to as the northern segment of the north-south greenway. There's also a southern segment that's currently unfunded that shows up on this slide here that would follow the train tracks, the smart right of way. Here's a blow up again of the northern segment. So this was split into 2 segments mainly because of the different jurisdictions. So the first segment was the overcrossing of the creek that took place within Caltrans right-of-way. It's a lot easier to have Caltrans do a project in their right-of-way than a local agency do a project in Caltrans right-of-way. So this project was split, and the portion that's within Caltrans right-of-way was delivered by Caltrans. That was the creek overcrossing that was finished last year. And then the continuation of that path where it touches down on Old Redwood Highway down to the pedestrian overcrossing is within the city of Larkspur's jurisdiction. So the city has agreed to administer that project. So that's highlighted in yellow at the left hand of the screen, and the recently completed creek crossing is shown in orange in this segment. The funding for this project, there's no local funds in this project other than the city is going to pave Old Redwood Highway as part of this project. So we're going to be using our citywide paving plan fund to pave Old Redwood Highway because it makes sense to pave the street at the same time we're doing the path because there's a slight realignment in the street. But there's just over $1 million of both state and federal funding in this project. Congestion management, air quality is the federal funding, and a local partnership project is a state funding. That's part of the gas tax, the SB1 funding. And that funding has a deadline attached to it where the project has to be awarded in December of this year or that funding goes away. Here's looking, this is a cross section. If you were driving north on Old Redwood Highway, basically what we're looking at here is building a new 10-foot wide multi-use path in asphalt next to the street, basically between Old Redwood Highway and the Caltrans freeway. The fence at the right-of-way gets moved slightly, so we have clearances on the path. The parallel parking gets retained on the west side of Old Redwood Highway. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to use city funds to repave Redwood Highway as part of that project. Here's the plan view. So this is highlighted. Yellow is the new path. This is split into two. So starting at the top, that's where you see the curved section. That's where the path would meet the pedestrian overcrossing near Industrial. And then it basically follows along the west side of Old Redwood Highway. And then as you follow along on the bottom, it meets up with the section of path that Caltrans recently completed over the creek. Again, here's the overview. Highlighted in yellow is the section that's the subject of the request for approval of plans tonight at the top of the screen. And then this shows some options for the southern segment. The project funding for the North-South Greenway basically was exhausted with these two northern segment projects. So currently there's no funding for the southern segment, so they've kind of stalled. They were progressing along with the northern segments back 5-6 years ago when all the project development and the project planning was done. But basically the cost, mainly of the section overcrossing the creek, those costs went way up over time. And that original funding for the North-South Greenway has been exhausted. So the Transportation Authority of Marin is actively now looking for funding to start working again on the southern segments. And as I mentioned, the southern segment is proposed to follow the smart right-of-way. At one time, there were talks about the southern segment continuing down Old Redwood Highway, but it was determined the North-South Greenway itself would follow the smart railroad tracks, and then the city has committed to looking into bicycle and pedestrian improvements on Old Redwood Highway. And so we do have an adopted capital improvement program project for that section. It's unfunded, as is the TAM project, but we do have an unfunded project in our books to continue improvements down Old Redwood Highway. There were some complications with the southern segment. As I mentioned, the proposed segment would be on the smart tracks, which doesn't connect to Old Redwood Highway. So there were a lot of studies looking at how to connect the northern segment that's on Old Redwood Highway to the southern segment that would be on the smart tracks. There were 7 or 8 different alignments that were looked at. The 2 on the city streets with the blue arrows here, Industrial and Rich. And then further north, they looked at some alignments through private property. But this effort stopped when the funding ran out, so there's been no further developments on selecting a preferred alignment for that southern segment at this time. As I mentioned, the city will be looking at, once we complete our segment on the northern segment, to see if there's some funding out there to continue improvements on Old Redwood Highway. While people may choose to use the southern segment on the smart tracks, so if that gets funded by TAM and completed, we understand that some people may prefer to continue along Old Redwood Highway. So we are starting to drop some preliminary plans to be able to go out and look for funding and get some community feedback on what that project would look like. It has some challenges. If you look at that southern segment of Old Redwood Highway, if you were to keep the path on the west side, then you have freeway ramps to cross and you have to deal with Caltrans through that process. Whereas if you move the path to the east side of Old Redwood Highway, you don't have to deal with the Caltrans off ramps, but you have more driveways to deal with, including the driveway into Trader Joe's property. And I think preliminary studies suggested that a traffic signal or two may be required on Old Redwood Highway to make this alignment work. And then in addition, during the preliminary look at the North-South Greenway, there were a lot of components to the project that were imagined at that time. And some of those, as I mentioned, the funding has been used up, have been dropped. For example, on the project that we're asking you to approve tonight, the landscaping has been removed from that project. The lighting has been removed from that project due to cost constraints. In addition, back in the planning phase, there were talks about adding a sidewalk on the east side of the northern segment of Old Redwood Highway. Those are no longer in the plans due to the costs. There were a couple of exhibits that were drawn up for that, so I've just included those here. Our intent is that when we start looking at the next segment south on Old Redwood Highway to see how we may continue the bicycle and pedestrian improvements, we would come back again and look at the east side of that northern segment and see if one of these options that were drawn up 6-7 years ago for those improvements could be incorporated into that project and included in the funding request that we would do. So that's the end of my presentation. Again, the request before you tonight is to approve the plans for this northern segment so that we can go out to bid and get construction bids for that project. And I'm available for any questions.
Great, thank you, Julian. Councilmember Carroll.
Thank you. This project, as Julian noted, started 7 or 8 years ago. And at the time, the policy was to notify the property owners about stuff. I can't speak to how the boardwalk community, which is about 250 people, residents, were notified, but I can't speak to the park. And that was that the notice was sent to the owner of the property who lived out in Dillon Beach, and she didn't bother to tell any of the 89 residents, mobile homes, roughly 250, 300 people, anything about it. So we came very late to this process. As is mentioned, there's going to be building a 10-foot walkway with no lighting, no landscaping, right next to the freeway. I defy any of you to go out there and stand there for more than 5 minutes. The noise will drive you nuts. The drainage has greatly improved. Kudos to Corte Madera Sewer District. They have improved a lot of the flooding that used to occur there, but still, when there is rain, there will be splash from the freeway onto this pedestrian, quote unquote, walkway. If you have been down there and you know, coming down off of that Corte Madera Bridge, it will be a straight shot onto this 10-foot walkway. Though I'm told by TAM that signage will be put up telling bicycles to move into the traffic lane. There is currently a separate bike lane next to the parked cars. That will be eliminated because of the sidewalk, and bicycles will be encouraged to mix with the car and truck traffic on Redwood Highway. And I can just guarantee you, knowing particularly human males with testosterone coming down that bridge, they're not going to divert into the street. They're going to go straight ahead. And for a senior citizen like me, who can barely hear the regular bikes, and I can't hear the electric bikes coming up behind me, this is going to be one scary proposition on a 10-foot wide walkway. This fall is when TAM is going to be trying to put together the package for the North-South Greenway. And in doing my research on all this, I discovered on the east side, the mobile home park side, there is already a current easement and or right of way. No one's quite sure because nobody wants to spend the money to research it. There's a 20, I was told 20 foot. I went out and measured it this morning. It's 22 feet between the edge of the roadway and the mobile home park that already exists. Now, in the proposals you saw, they were going to put a 20-foot easement either through the roofing company or through the back of the mobile home park, which you can imagine how the residents feel about a 20-foot easement through the back. The owner has not been approached, and it could be difficult negotiations given history. But more importantly, it would become an ideal place if you've been around the bike paths in San Rafael, Rohnert Park, Santa Rosa, and Novato. That's where the home was set up, off the main street in an isolated strip of land like that. So I think it's inviting a problem down the road. And as you know, those communities are all under court order not to remove those parks right now. So it could be setting it up. With the 22-foot right-of-way that already exists, apparently, on the east side, there would be no need to negotiate the rights. We already have it. 22 feet would allow for a protected bike lane, an 8-foot wide protected bike lane going both ways, allow for a at least 6-foot wide pedestrian walkway, and still leave room for an 8-foot wide parallel parking lane. I think this project, as well intentioned as it might be, it's going to make us look stupid putting a walkway next to a freeway. And I think there's other alternatives that need to be explored. I realize there's only 2 months before the funding, quote unquote, runs out. So I would suspect we could ask for an extension if a more reasonable plan is brought up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councilmember Way.
So if my memory serves me right, because I was on the council when we went through all these discussions, it's a very complicated geographic and jurisdictional area out there. And there's Smart Train owns part of it. Caltrans owns another part. Corte Madera owns part of it. There's private property owners. It was, from what I remember, it was kind of a mess trying to create the ideal location. Would take a lot of purchasing of private land, et cetera. So if I recall right, Julian, this was the alternate, this was the option that was amenable to all parties at the time because of the complexity of trying to do the one that went behind the park, including the wetlands restoration, et cetera. And while I agree with you, it may not be choice, I think it's the only one we're going to have because all the other options were negated because of the complexity of them at the time. Does that kind of ring bells to you too? I know you were here.
Yeah, well, this it's a little awkward because they're called the north segment and the southern segment, and they're kind of east and west. But the northern segment that we're proposing to finish now does not preclude the construction of the southern segment. And part of that is because part of the goal of the northern segment was to come down and make a connection to the pedestrian overcrossing that's down on Industrial. So if you look at the ultimate plan, the northern segment actually comes down and may come down further than where the southern segment takes off from. So this is a connection that was deemed important on this side because it makes that connection to the pedestrian overcrossing.
And the bus pad. I remember the conversation
and the bus
about
pad on that side of the street. It was certainly discussed having it on the other side. There were lots of driveways on the other side. So it's kind of like when I showed the segment further south where you've got one side where you've got a couple of issues, and on the other side you have a lot of driveways. And so from my recollection, that's why the path was chosen to stay on the freeway side.
So I hear your point. It's not ideal, but I think it's the complexity of the other one would mean we would not get anything along the back side of the marsh area there. So I hear your concern about making sure that pedestrian use is safe there. And of course that opens up the recent unsafe driving that many motorized scooters are doing these days, but I think we can work on that. I think it's our best deal.
I disagree. And for one, not all parties were involved. We started with that statement, and that's not true. We weren't in community included, and we are, over 250, 300 people. I don't know the boardwalk community, that's another 250 people, whether they were included. We are by far the bigger users of pedestrian walking along that side of the street, much more so than anyone going to or from the ferry or over the creek. I think there's more bicyclists than there are pedestrians. And we need those paths to both get to the bus stop and to Trader Joe's for shopping. And we have a lot of senior citizens. In fact, I think one of our residents wrote you a letter about the construction at the other end of the street that's going on right now and how it's blocking some of the residents from getting to and from Trader Joe's with their walkers. So I think the thing that this actually makes the situation worse for bicyclists because it's going to force them either into the street onto a narrow sidewalk. And if we at least look at this other option, there could be a protected bike lane and a protected sidewalk for the residents of both those communities to get to Trader Joe's. And I think putting an unlit 10-foot wide walkway right next to a freeway, we're going to look stupid. And that.
Well, I remember all the conversations about how the impossibility of getting all those property owners to agree to sell their land to make a bike path through there. I mean, part of the bike path, if I recall, was going to have to go right through the mobile home park.
And that's what I'm protesting and saying.
Yeah,
I think
but that's
a bike lane on the other side that goes down Rich and Industrial makes a lot more sense for everybody, for both the bicycle community and for the local residents who live there trying to go shopping and getting on the public buses.
Yeah. Well, all right. I know that was explored, and I knew people in greater capacity than mine negated that as an option. So I'm willing to move this consent.
If I could just ask Councilmember Kendall, any questions or?
Julian. Usually things are on the consent calendar because they've already been vetted and, they've kind of come to a consensus. I hear the councilman's concern, and I also hear the concern that we have to get this through so we don't lose our funding. Maybe this is a question for Dan or Sky. Is there a way to have a short, put it on calendar so, all voices can be heard? And I mean, again, I don't want to, it feels like we've already done this, but it sounds like certain people may not have been included in that conversation that feel like they should have been. Is there some remedy that we can kind of do a short redo and, try to get everybody on the same page?
So, excuse me. I think it's important to take a step back for a second and understand that.
Get that. Would you try and get
it? It's important to focus on something Julian said during his presentation. The city agreed to build something it didn't plan. This was planned by the Transportation Authority of Marin as part of a bigger process that they're going through. So some of Councilmember Carroll's criticisms about noticing and participation are not, I believe, directed at the city. They're directed at TAM, who did all of this planning. I'm willing to be on record because I've been this way from the get-go since I've worked here and been involved in these projects. I have always told TAM staff that my priority is the entirety of Old Redwood Highway, and that the pragmatic approach to moving people on this side of the city is Old Redwood Highway, and that the so-called southern segment is a nicety that certain bicyclists and pedestrians want because they'd like to go enjoy what's a beautiful view. And I'm not discounting that, but that's not really a path for moving people. Old Redwood Highway is the path for moving people. The decision through the process that TAM did was to present us with the option of whether we wanted to build this project. So at the end of the day, your question today in front of you is whether you want us to build TAM's project. And if you say no, then we have to report that to TAM, and they'll be up to TAM whether they want to go through a different process, not us, because it's not really our project from a standpoint of we didn't plan it. We just said we would build it because it's in our jurisdiction. And that is a common thing we do with TAM. And it's what all the cities do is cooperation with our regional agencies. We often allow them to plan out a project with our input, and then we say, okay, we'll build that.
And they did all those plans and all that out.
And I'm just not in a position to comment on what they did and didn't.
So if I can maybe tag on Councilmember Candel's question, just hypothetically, procedurally, if we wanted to look at alternatives or look at some of the weaknesses, what would that look like? We would then submit this request to TAM, and they would immediately have the discretion to say, well, we can stop this project altogether. I mean, if we pass it on consent tonight, then we know for sure the project is happening. Are those kind of the two binaries or two parts of the binary?
Well, I'm going to defer to Mr. Skinner because I think he's talked a little bit with TAM staff about timelines. But in general, if you were to say no, it's just up to TAM then what's going to happen. You can make requests, but you're not the decision maker.
Okay.
So,
yeah. So unfortunately, there was a question before about a quick turnaround and a quick redo. Because this project has federal funding in it, there's no such thing as a quick anything. Essentially, if you chose not to move forward in implementing this project, the $2 million that's assigned to it would go away. We would not get that money back.
All right, so let me rephrase that. Councilmember Carroll is asking us to vote no. I am uninformed on this project because this was just brought up by Councilmember Carroll today. I respect Councilman Carroll, and I would like to give it its due diligence of, do I agree or disagree? I don't want to vote yes just because it's on the consent calendar. So my question is, if we were to bring this back in 2 weeks or something like that, and can maybe Councilman Carroll can present, or maybe there can be some back and forth between staff and Councilman Carroll, and I could get a little bit more information about, I don't know if it's the accuracy of the statements or the impact of the statements, so that I can make an informed decision. I mean, I don't want to blow off his concerns and say it's on the consent calendar. At the same time, I don't want to put the brakes on this, because not Councilman Carroll, but if any one council member says they object, I would want to, at least hear about it and think it through and not just kind of make a quick decision.
So just because we're getting a lot of references to the consent calendar, I want the public to understand why this is on the consent calendar. It was already approved as part of the CIP. What you're being asked to do tonight is award a contract. So if you choose not to, you're essentially saying we've changed our mind. We want to revisit the decision to previously have approved this capital project. That's within your right to do that. But I just want to be clear, it was on consent because the project had already been approved. The best I think we could offer is to invite TAM to the next meeting, and then you can engage them in what your options are or are not. But I don't think your staff is equipped because we don't have an alternative project to offer you. So we would essentially continue to make the same presentation that we made to you this evening. You would have more time to think about it and perhaps either invite Sam, they make a presentation and engage you, or offline, you could choose to engage the TAM staff in a discussion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so just a clarification there. So, I mean, this sounds a little bit like a timeline so that, you know, again, keeping it fairly simple, we approve it and it goes through as written. If we don't pass it tonight and invite TAM, we're basically saying, you know, we just need more time and we will approve it. Or if we're saying that you need to rewrite it, there just isn't the time. It's a federal project and we lose the money.
Exactly.
Generally, yes. Yeah, okay. I do want to make sure too, because I think out of necessity, we have to talk about the so-called southern segment and the northern segment together, because it's how TAM has been planning the entirety of the area. But it's important to remind ourselves what Mr. Skinner said earlier, which is this segment at the end of the day has nothing to do with whether or not the connection of the southern segment back to Old Redwood Highway is going to happen or not. The fact that it's shown on diagrams, that's an unfunded plan that hasn't been implemented in any way. So it's just important that you recognize all you're focusing on is the construction of this connection from that's shown in these slides and discussed in the report along Old Redwood Highway on its western side.
All right. They have a tendency, I mean, TAM, if they work through these projects, they make the approvals, they do all the renderings, and if a city doesn't take or approve it, they walk away with the money. And I'll give you the example, the Green Beret interchange, where we went round and round with them from 2010 to 2012, and Corte Madera was heavily involved in that, and there was a lot of pushback, and there was a huge plan to renovate that entire intersection, that entire exchange that's there, and really repair a lot of the inadequacies in that exchange. And Corte Madera couldn't buy in, and we didn't vote for it, and they pulled all the money, and we never got a renovated Green Beret interchange, which is a dangerous spot as it is, in my opinion, and we should have renovated it.
Okay, so let me ask, if we put this over for 2 weeks, is there any danger of losing our funding if in 2 weeks we pass it?
No, I think 2 weeks is fine. Once you get out beyond 2 weeks, then you run into a danger zone where if we have a hiccup during the bidding process, we could lose our ability to award it before the funding deadline. And I think it's important to note the funding for this project has already been extended a number of times because of the delays with the Caltrans project, and it all being this funding has been sitting there for a while. We've already asked for extensions. I do not believe we would get any more.
All right. So I guess my thought, and I'm sure people will disagree on all sides, is to put this over for 2 weeks to our next meeting, ask Councilman Carroll to email us and put it on public comment if he wants to, his position, so we all can review it and be a little bit more educated onto his concerns. And then we can agree or disagree at that point. And if we decide to go forward with it at that point, there's no harm, no foul, and we still have the funding. It just gives us a chance to be a little bit more educated about his concerns, is my position. And, you know, again, that's just me. Okay.
Can I get a last comment?
Yes. Well, I think Councilmember Way.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
you wanted to be the last.
Oh, well,
yeah,
no,
I was just going to put forward a motion, but
I know what I would ask the other council members to do is go down there and look at it and imagine a 10-foot sidewalk unlit next to that freeway and look up at the way it's going to come down off that creek. And do you really want your name on that project? Now, this goes to a bigger issue. Just because the money's allocated doesn't make the project right. There was an article in today's paper about after Hurricane Sandy, they banked 4 million gallons of gasoline for hospital generators in back east. And they're now finally going to sell it because they realized it's stupid because gasoline expires. And, you know, it was a mistake. It was a natural reaction, you know, out of fear of if the pipeline had gotten damaged or something, but they made a mistake. And now they're finally going to rectify it. Just because the money's allocated for a wrong project that my community wasn't included on. I've been raising the questions about this project since last year, August of last year, when I first started questioning this. But I wasn't listened to because I wasn't anybody back then. After November, once I got on the TAM board, suddenly people started at least responding to my emails about this. So this is not something I just came up with last week when I saw this on the agenda. I've been trying to work with TAM staff and with Julian, and Dan is quite right. A lot of the responsibility for this is on TAM, but it's like pulling teeth. And bureaucrats have this attitude of, well, the money's allocated, we have to spend it. We have to. Why? If it's a mistake, it's a mistake. So I ask all of you to go down there, stand next to that freeway, and tell me you want your name on a 10-foot wide sidewalk next to a freeway where you're going to get splashed when it's raining, where bicyclists are going to go whizzing by you. It's better not to do the project at all, quite frankly, and let's hope that they'll do something with the right-of-way on the other side of the road when they do the North-South Greenway project. It's yes, it may take years, but why build a stupid project if it's still stupid?
Well, okay, but because you're going to see, because what people do right now is they walk in the middle of the road, they ride their bike in the middle of the road.
They know they have
unsafe.
a bike lane now. That's going to be eliminated.
Right. Well, I'd like
this project is completed. They'll have to ride supposedly in traffic, but you know damn well they're not going to. They're going to ride on that sidewalk next to where I'm trying to walk.
Yeah. Well, I'll just put forward a motion that I'd like to pass 4.3. If nobody approves it, then we'll go somewhere else.
Okay. I guess I would second that, but I did appreciate Councilmember Candel's position. You know, I think Councilmember Way, I think you've done a lot more homework, and I may come to your conclusion, but you know, even looking at the drawings, I'm a little uninformed, and I agree. I want to make the right decision. And if I understand you, Julian, there's no risk in waiting 2 weeks. It's not going to change anything from the funding or the project or any of that. That's correct, right?
2 weeks would not be an issue, no.
Okay.
So did you second my motion?
I did not. I was saying why I wouldn't. I just wanted to be clear. Sorry. But if anyone else wants to second, go for it.
I would probably vote against it. I'll second it if you want to get the, so we can get the vote. Okay, I'll second the motion.
Okay, roll call, please.
Councilmember Carroll?
No.
Councilmember Way?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Campbell?
I'm going to vote no, conditioned on us bringing it back in 2 weeks. Okay.
Mayor Paulson?
No, same conditions. Okay, so then I guess we can make a motion to put this item back on the consent calendar at the next meeting on the 20th.
Probably wouldn't bring it back on the consent calendar since clearly council wants to hopefully receive a report from TAM on this and have a further opportunity to discuss it. So I just suggest a motion to continue this item to the next regular meeting and for it to be a business item.
Okay, so, as you said, so you want to make that motion, Councilmember Kendall?
I don't think we need a motion for that, do we? To just bring it back on next.
I feel comfortable with pretty good direction here.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that. That was a lot of time on consent, but a good issue. So with that, we move on. Okay, so let's go to the city manager's oral report, please.
A little later than I'm used to making the city manager's report. I have a couple of things I want to highlight for the council and the community. First is that this Saturday, the Chamber of Commerce is holding its annual major community event, the Wine Stroll, here in the downtown. It's from 4 to 7 p.m. What's different this year is with the growing success of the event, the Chambers requested a street closure on Magnolia in order to facilitate a safer event for the community. So we've worked with them from Ward to King on Magnolia. So the stretch that most of us think of as the downtown will be closed from noon to 9 p.m. So folks should start to plan accordingly. There'll be some signage out to remind everyone. We're making adjustments for the fire department for that period, so we'll be ready to. But Magnolia will be closed, and folks, there's still, I understand, tickets available. Encourage folks to think about coming out. It's a lovely event and support the Chamber of Commerce and a lot of the businesses that are going to be present. The other thing I wanted to highlight on the upcoming calendar through our neighborhood response groups, there's 2 events taking place this month that I encourage folks to check out. On Tuesday the 12th from 7 to 8 p.m. at the Corte Madera Community Center, the NRG group is hosting the Powered and Prepared for an Emergency presentation, where they're going to talk about making sure that folks are ready and what 5 simple steps they can take to be ready in the case that you need to evacuate in the face of a disaster. And then secondly, Maui is on a lot of folks' minds. So we've had a lot of inquiries, and the Fire Chief Ruben Martin and his team have worked with the NRGs to put together on September 20 from 6:30 to 7:30 in the Corte Madera Community Center a wildfire preparedness presentation and what you need to know. Now, so that you didn't have to remember everything I just said, I also encourage folks to go to nrgmarin.org, which is our neighborhood response group's website. They've really put a nice calendar together. They have many more events coming up in the fall, all of them worthwhile. And I encourage folks to go to the website and check it out. If your neighborhood doesn't have an NRG, we encourage you to reach out to the coordinator and express your interest in finding out how you can organize an NRG with her help. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Any questions for the city manager? Okay. So then we'll move on to council members' oral reports and comments. Does any council member have anything to report or any comments to make? Go for it. Well, thought you might surprise us.
No, sorry. A couple of meetings. We had I'm the liaison to the Heritage Preservation Board and Planning Commission. And to relieve Sky's anxiety, I did not speak or particularly listen to the hearing matters that they had other than on specific properties. I just paid a lot of attention, though, to their comments about the objective design plan, and I found it fascinating. The members of both the Heritage Preservation Board and the Planning Commission are so well informed on these issues, and their depth of knowledge just blows me away, quite frankly. So I take their recommendations very seriously. These are very sharp people. The mayor and I had a meeting with the head of the senior staff for HHS, Lee Pullen, and the new chair of the Aging Commission, Lee Nodowich, who represents District 2. And it was a very frank, open conversation, and gives me hope. We could see some changes in how we deal with this issue, which is going to be a big issue in the next 10 years, how we deal with the aging in Marin. There was Doug Adams at Piper Park, which was a lot of fun. I was very impressed, quite frankly. It was a great event. On the 30th, we had the 1251 South Alicio open house. And I found it interesting. Was the first was, I guess, for us government types. And that was followed by a question and answer period in a group. And then they had another session for the local residents, but they did not have a question and answer session at the end of that one. I thought that was kind of interesting. But I'm sure people were allowed to ask their questions individually. Two of my fellow council members brought up some good points, Catherine, about how pets would be handled at that facility. There really isn't a lot of green space. So if there are some dogs there, I'm hoping the biggest complaint we get from the neighbors is where these people are letting their dogs go to the bathroom rather than some of the other imagined atrocities that people are thinking. So I do have it on my list of asking how we can mitigate it, perhaps in one of the patios, some sort of, I guess there's special mats now for dogs to pee on or something. So maybe we can deal with that. Scott asked some good questions about patio furniture and how they're the tenants are gonna recreate. And again, I'll be asking about that. My big thing is TVs in the individual rooms. They did it at Jonathan's place up in San Rafael, and I really think they should do it at this location. Because for some of you, I've mentioned before, I have a son who has mental illness and been homeless. And he moved into Jonathan's place. And one of the big inducements was the big screen TV. That got him more excited than the staff help or all the services the county was offering. The idea that he could watch a big screen TV was what sold him on it. The other issue is exercise equipment. I didn't really see anything, and I think that some of the residents would benefit from that. So that's another thing I'm going to follow up on. And probably I'll be doing that tomorrow night when we have the Marin City or the Marin Council members and Mayor's Homeless Committee meeting. A couple of the HH staff will be there, and I'm going to follow up on your questions and mine. And tomorrow, the mayor and I are going to be meeting with the interim CEO of the Marin Community Clinics. And then also tomorrow is the senior fair up at the Marin Civic Center, which I encourage people to attend, and I'll be up there checking it out. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Carroll. Councilmember Kendall. Nothing?
I think Councilmember Carroll covered it all. I don't have any else.
Okay, I'll just a couple brief. I know we want to move on. I just wanted to thank Councilmember Carroll. I think we're noticing from all these reports, it's really a lot of due diligence. And for me personally, I've kind of wanted to get on a journey of understanding our health and human services. It's not something that our city, our agency does directly, but 1251 really opened my eyes. And so some of the meetings he's referring to, I'll, in the next meeting, probably on the 20th, try to give a concise 1-minute summary. I really feel that the county has a budget 40 times that of Larkspur, and 1/3 of their money is in health and human services. And it's something that I'd really like to understand. And the clinic tomorrow, for example, they're, community clinics, not part of the county, but they have them, I think, a couple in Larkspur. And these are all bearing on the issues of equity and of human services and of aging and so forth. So I'm really interested, and I'll report back. Okay, so with that, we're done with item number 6, and we go to public hearings. And tonight we have a public hearing on objective design and development standards for multifamily and mixed use developments. Could we please get a staff report?
Is Elise doing the staff report?
Which counts?
There she is.
Yeah. I'm sorry? We don't do public comment on oral reports, but I'm happy to talk to you if you want later. Okay.
I'll make this introduction brief. I'm trying to get out of my Zoom, but I'll turn this over to David from ELS Architecture, who's our consultant working with our housing element consultant on this project, and he has a presentation for you. I'll check in after his presentation.
Thank you, Elise. Can I get screen sharing capability, please? Great, there we are. Thank you to the council for allowing me to speak today. What I'm going to talk about today, many of you are familiar with. It's the objective design and development standards process that we've been working for about the past year with a lease in the city of Larkspur to develop these guidelines. And these guidelines are to apply to multifamily residential only. They don't apply to single family residential. They don't apply to commercial. In that event of commercial use, it will revert to your existing code. This has been necessitated due to Senate Bill, State Bill 35 and 330, which allow expedited processing for multifamily projects with the requirement that cities need to have objective design and development standards for review, so the review can be at a ministerial level. So what I want to present today is a show that walks through the odds, how we have arranged them, what their organization is, and then give some examples of how it works and how it would be applied to some projects around the city that you might be familiar with to understand if those buildings were built today, which parts would be compliant and which would not be. So let me share my screen. Can I please get, can I please be allowed to share? Thank you. So the original starting point for this project was a 360-page document that was created by Marin County that was done by the consultant Opticos. And it was intended for each jurisdiction within the county of Marin to take it and then make it their own, to reduce it in size and make it specific to their community. We have wanted to do that for Larkspur for a number of reasons. Largely because Larkspur is a very individual community that's different than other communities within the county of Larkspur, or the county of Marin. And we also want to simplify it because a 360-page document is extremely onerous for a city of Larkspur's size to manage over the period of reviewing a number of projects that they might see. So we've tried to boil down what's in the criteria. So generally what's in the objective design development standards covers the massing, the bulk, the lot width, the height, the amount of setbacks and encroachments, a lot of form-based code, the allowances on parking, accessory buildings, how it fronts the street. And these all have to be displayed or presented in an objective manner. So we've broken it down and made it more concise in terms of the number of chapters from where we started with the original County of Marin document. We've laid it out, as you can see on the screen, just easy to follow. You get a welcome into the process. You understand what zone you're in. You look for the building area and the requirements, and it just walks you through how to do it. And later on in this presentation, we'll do a sample of how that works. The original document had 8 different types of density zones. The city of Larkspur, we felt, did not need all 8. We picked 4 out of these that were commensurate with what the city of Larkspur is like. And then we took them and we applied them to your existing zoning districts using those 4 based on how your current zoning is working. So there is some relationship between the zones in the odds and your existing zoning. And we broke it up into, if you look at from top down, the lowest density, which is a single family T3SN, to the higher density, which is a T5, and that's around the transit hub of Larkspur Landing. And then as it relates to the housing element sites, because I know you're working with EMC and Andy Flower on the housing element, just to give you a general idea, the sites that are circled in yellow are the housing element sites. I believe this is pretty current, just so you have an understanding about how the housing element sites fit into the overall odds. So now I want to walk through each one of the sections real quickly, just to talk about what the density and look, appearance, and massing will be for each one of these 4 districts. So the first district is the T3. This one emulates single family residential, where you might have a duplex or a triplex, maybe even a fourplex. but the look and feel needs to remain like a single family neighborhood, which means that if you have a house that has multiple units, it reads as a single family home. That you don't have a lot of different curb cuts for cars, that the parking is handled sometimes in garages, sometimes on driveways. It varies a little bit, but it's very similar. What you see in Larkspur is very similar to what we tried to apply. And we went all over Larkspur and we looked at what the building and lot forms were. And we saw that the lots in a lot of these districts that are T3 are fairly narrow lots, and the narrowness of the lot dictates sort of the size and the scale of the building. It keeps it at that residential scale. So we're maintaining that with a lot width of 75-foot maximum. And then we have various regulations in terms of how the massing works within the site and how accessory buildings work. And then when you get to the building height, there's no commercial in these districts. So we have, a stoop with, 2.5 at a base level, or if you were to go after a bonus with affordable housing, you get up to 3 floors maximum, 35 feet. And that stays within the single family construction realm. The next setup is the T4 attached housing and transitional scale. You can see some of Larkspur here that is similar to that. This is a pretty wide variety of housing. This is 3-floor apartments. This is townhouses. This is lots that might have townhouses with parking under them. This might be, like you see in the top right, apartment developments that have the parking collected together. There might be, some shading over it. But in general, it allows for larger sites so that you can do more of the larger multifamily projects. But in consideration of the overall scale of these existing districts, we're giving maximums in terms of the lot width that you can design to and the building length, so that they don't get too large in a way that will seem massive in comparison to their neighbors. A lot of people, when they talk about design standards, they talk about the architecture and the style. Is it Tudor? Is it modern? Is it craftsman? But so much about a place has to do about the size and massing of the building, how far it's set back from the street, how far apart it is from its neighbor, how tall it is. These are the things that we're trying to regulate because we believe that it has a larger impact on the overall look and feel and nature of what Larkspur is. And then in the T4 SMS district, which is a little more density, this district does include the historic downtown. One of the ways that we are trying to ensure that downtown maintains that look and feel is that we're not allowing someone to take 3 consecutive lots and develop one large project over those lots. It needs to maintain the staccato rhythm that makes that historic downtown what it is. And then on larger areas, we are allowing a slightly larger floor plate, but it still keeps that sort of Larkspur scale intact. And what you see a lot, like when you look downtown, it is about the small, narrow parcels, not a lot of curb cuts. There's pretty minimal parking. Most of the parking is behind the back. So we're trying to protect the downtown scale and aesthetic in a way that if someone does develop, it'll be developed in kind with what is there existing today. There is commercial allowed in this district. So we have here on the left, we have accommodations for building height, floor height for commercial. We've been suggesting, that there's a ground floor of 12 feet. And I know when we were meeting with the Planning Commission, there was a lot of discussion about whether that would be adequate, whether the existing downtown is probably less. We have found that, we do a lot of commercial architecture. If you want to attract tenants, usually you need more floor to ceiling height for the commercial. I think that's something up to debate today. And then for residential, it's the same thing with the stoops. Here we're allowing 3 floors maximum with the base scheme and 4 floors with a bonus. And then finally, in the highest density district with some of the larger lots is the T5 district. This is around the ferry terminal and down by the Costco site. This is an opportunity to get real density. So this is 5 floors base up to 7 floors maximum. This is where we're going to try to allow for larger projects. And it makes all the sense in the world, especially with some parking reductions, because you're near the train, You've got great public transit at location. It's walkable. You got Marin Country Mart right there if you're in that area. So, you know, the density will have less impact here in terms of the traffic and the population than it would, you know, west of the highway, where it's just a smaller, finer grain. So we wanted to walk through one example here of how a developer would pick up a site and walk through the site. So we picked 560 Magnolia. We just picked this whole block. It's just to the west of the proposed future library community center lot. And this lot existing is actually broken into a bunch of different parcels. We're just looking at it as a whole parcel just for the purpose of this. So if you're a developer and you walk up to this, the first question is, what zone are you in? So they would look in the map and they would see that they are in the T4 SMS zone, which is also the historic downtown zone, because you're coming out of Magnolia and you pass it. So we wanted to have it have a you know, a look and feel that was not too abrupt to the historic downtown. And then from there, you will look on the page to see where your primary frontage is. And then the primary frontage will give you the orientation of the site that tells you what your maximum length of site is in the primary frontage. So what we've done to help reduce the really large projects in this zone is if your site is over 150 feet in width on the primary frontage, you have to break it down into separate design sites in which you're going to put separate buildings on. And those buildings have a maximum length on the frontage side of 120 feet. We allow more depth, and then you have to fit in open space, obviously. So the developer would look at this, look at the site criteria, look at the setbacks on each side, figure out how they were going to cut the sites up using the design site of 150 feet, and then lay out the buildings. And then from there, they will simply, like any other project, they will go through and look at the building height allowance and build to that. There aren't a lot of slopes on this particular site to work out, but we have in each section given provisions for how to handle sites in a way that works in 65-foot increments, which works with wood frame construction. And then the developer will look at possible encroachments if they want to do an accessory building and what the requirements are for that. They'll go over to the parking section. One point about the parking is that, you know, developers can get waivers on the parking. So the parking minimums are not as relevant here because the waiver could be asked for possibly no parking or reduced parking below what we're showing. And then the primary building massing allows the developer to take those design sites and actually mass out the building. And here you can see some examples where on the primary frontage, this building, the A length is the 120-foot max of the two 150-foot wide sites. And then we allow more length on a wing. You know, we also are putting provisions that the parking, you know, should not be on the street side, it should be behind the building, so that we can maintain that downtown feel. And then you have to apply open space. We have open space requirements in terms of the amount of common open space area and private open space area. And that can be achieved in a couple of different ways that are pretty typical for this type of document. So the end result of this, and this is just merely an example, but there's, you know, it's broken into design sites. We have a couple of larger residential buildings to the north. We have townhouses that are self-parked to the south. There's a common area here that is a road, and then there's open space here. One of the changes that we made when we all went through this with the steering committee was, you know, there was concern that ground floor retail would not have a large enough floor plate for, say, a grocer that might come in. So we put in provisions to allow the ground floor to extend to the setback line, you know, if there's a retail use that would need that, but then everything above the first floor would have to conform to the 65-foot maximum width for the residential. And then after they've gotten to that part, you get into a little bit of architecture in terms of, you know, how the architecture is confronting the street, whether it's a stoop, a dooryard, a forecourt. There's some different typologies that are pretty typical typologies within residential architecture as options. And I think this will help keep the traditional look and feel of Larkspur alive, while allowing some buildings that might be a little bit larger, but still within scale of what Larkspur is. And then finally, we provide a palette of materials. And, you know, certainly you can't name every material. You don't want to name every material, but we wanted to provide enough flexibility with the materials that will allow affordable housing developers to successfully develop in Larkspur, which means that, you know, you have to be okay with vinyl windows, for instance, instead of wood windows. You know, and I know some communities want to, you know, prohibit vinyl windows, but we want to provide an opportunity for developers to do affordable housing, so we can so that you can meet the housing element needs in the future. So then finally, I wanted to just walk through these three sites that are existing. The preamble to this is that if you have an existing building, you don't need to upgrade to these odds. So I'm just looking at these if they were developed today. Obviously, if someone owns a property, they don't need to make any changes based on these odds. So the first property we looked at was 30 Locust, which is a pretty typical 1960s building. It's a bar residential building. It has parking on the ground floor with 2 floors of residential above. And so we applied the odds to it. We looked at the district and we wanted to see what worked and what didn't. So there's some aspects of this project that are compliant in terms of the design site size and the building height, the encroachments and the setbacks, all that stuff works. What's not compliant is it has parking on the main street. The odds are going to require that there's 30 feet of the ground floor that has some transparency and active use in it. We don't want to see cars when we're just walking along the sidewalk. We want to see glazing on the primary frontage, and here you can see in this picture on the bottom right that there's no windows facing the street. There is an adequate shared open space. There aren't enough materials facing the primary way, and there's an absence of a variety of materials as well. So, you know, I think in all the buildings we look at, there's some things that work well and some don't. I think one of the big concerns when we started with this is that we don't want to see ground floor parking, you know, under a building. And I think we've addressed that. And that is one of the primary issues with this particular project. The second one is 285 Magnolia, which we always have really liked it. And we've used it as an example with communities across the country that we've worked with, because it has this on Magnolia, these leasable shop fronts, and then it has the residential over and then behind. So what is compliant about this? You know, the design site and the height, setbacks, the building mass, parking, all of that is compliant. The retail space is only 9 feet on these. It's a little low, so that's something that's not compliant. You know, that's another question. Like, this is a pretty residential district as you get down Magnolia. You know, 9 feet is probably appropriate there. It's tough to get a tenant, but maybe the intent is that it's a loft type situation where the owner would sell their goods out of there. Maybe that is okay. Maybe there's a way that we can build something in for that. We were suggesting more glazing at the ground floor. And then there's a whole discussion about whether the buildings in the rear are considered accessory buildings or not. And, you know, that was something that we kind of had to resolve in terms of what would be allowed for accessory buildings in height and size and scale in comparison to the primary buildings on the street. And then finally, this is a building in San Rafael. We wanted to find a building that would be something that possibly would occur near downtown. I think this is a pretty recent build. This meets the design site criteria and the building height, and it has the interior setbacks that work and encroachments. Where it's not compliant is it does have a parking access on the main primary frontage. We're trying to get the parking to go around the side. We haven't really seen how all the public open space works out here. So, you know, all of these projects there could be some tweaking with, certainly, but that goes to show part of our process in terms of how we refine this and what refinements we talked about as we work through the process. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I think there's a lot of discussion probably to have about this. I want to keep it as short as possible. So please, I welcome any comments or questions.
Great, thank you, David. Before we bring it back to the council for questions, I wanted to thank you and really thank our community development director, Elise. She and you and former council member Haroff, myself and the two planning commissioners probably had dozens and dozens of hours and meetings, and this get highly technical. And I appreciate the editing, the reduction, the clarifications, the case study here. So lots of thanks there. So council, any questions of David or Elise or staff or anybody?
Hi, David. Thanks for the presentation. I met you because I stepped in when Councilmember Haroff resigned. So I had privy to seeing the final or the product that you have now. And I fully appreciate all the work that went into it with the mayor and our planning commission and Elise Simonian. Because that looks like the meeting I attended, you guys had really spent a lot of time really refining the look and feel and the vision with a lot of public input from planning commission, et cetera. I really like what it looks like. I think it's much easier to understand than what we have now, which has not been very understandable to many people. One question I have is public open space. Would you help me define that? Is that to be the open space for the people who occupy the residential unit, or is it open to public as in anyone can enter that space?
That's a great question. I should have clarified. So public open space is public to the public. It could be a civic space on a large site. We have separate provisions for private open space, which either can be private as a balcony to a unit or accessed only by residents of that project. That's separate.
Okay. I just was wanting to make sure we clarified that. I know San Francisco has an ordinance in which they have public use of private buildings for their open space component. So
yes, that's proposed, and that's been highly successful. It usually happens on rooftops. We do want to allow developers to use, say, that public open space as some of their fire access if necessary, but it is generally intended to be, a public park.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Kendall.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. My immediate concern or question is that we had a building, or we're in the process of having a building down on North Magnolia that's 4 stories that didn't go over that favorably with a good portion of the community. So I am concerned, I guess, about the T4 SMS spaces and those in downtown, that we are going to end up having all these 4-story buildings, which may not fit with our current layout. And I was curious why we were choosing to put that in this area after we've had such backlash when one of them came in. It seems that, it might fit in other areas of the city better than in downtown.
Yeah, so I know the project of which you're referring to. I've looked at the submitted plans to that, and there are aspects of that would not be compliant to this odds. The buildings are longer than would be allowed, and the site isn't kind of broken up in the right rhythm. To get to that 4th floor, you would have to get the density bonus through providing the affordable housing. The width and the depth is probably is compliant. The ground floor, in terms of the stoops, that's compliant. The corner retail is compliant. I think it needs a little more glazing. The buildings would have to be a little bit smaller, though, in terms of like the length on Magnolia, because Magnolia would be considered the primary frontage.
So I guess my question is, why are we choosing T4 SMS for downtown as opposed to just the T4 SN or something else that would prohibit that would limit it to 2 floors?
The T4 SN is really for residential only, not for commercial. I think there's a discussion to say, well, should the T4 SMS allow up to the 4 floors? But we want to allow the ground floor commercial uses in that district because that is consistent with the existing quality of Magnolia, both in the historic downtown and as you go north.
Okay, so I guess next question is, if we as a council decided you know what, we want to actually cap it at 3 floors instead of 4. Is that not in compliance with state law? Would that be a problem if we said, hey, you know what, I think the community likes 3 floors as the cap? Would that be a problem?
Well, we can't downzone it. I would have to look to see if that would be the case. And I guess the other question, maybe Elise could weigh in on this, is like what sort of waivers a developer could get in this particular case. You know, if we did the 3 floors, could they waiver up to the 4?
But we already have 4 floors down here. Blue Rock is 4 floors, and it's a huge corner building. It's already 4.
I guess my concern is if there were more 4-floor buildings, it would feel more, I don't know, like a tunnel, but just more claustrophobic. And I think that was just part of the community's concern, is that they didn't want the building down on North Magnolia to set precedent that all of a sudden we're going to have these 4-floor buildings. But that's just my initial concern.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that though, when you read these design standards, the lot size and the width would prohibit a 4th floor in this sort of core area, but it wouldn't prohibit it in, let's say, the Lucky parking lot area, which is already adjacent to a 4-story Rose Lane condominium building. So
yeah, actually, you make a great point, Councilman Way, is that on small lots, if you get up to 4 floors, you're required an elevator, and that's, you know, $500,000 in cost, and it's probably not going to pencil on a small lot. So actually, I think that analysis is dead on.
I just wanted to add, both with regard to the form-based code that's proposed and to the North Magnolia project, that the 4th floor was a result of the density bonus. And here, what's being proposed for the downtown district is not a by right 4th story. It's a 4th story with a density bonus. And so the 1st story is commercial, 2 stories of residential above that, and then with a density bonus going to the 4th story, which, yes, is the same as the North Magnolia project, but that's also a result of state law, where as long as that is potentially a possibility for these projects, the same way that it was for North Magnolia. And if state law makes it possible for a developer to do that, nothing in these standards can prevent them from doing that. What it can do is try to push the overall design in a direction that, if the project does include the affordable units that qualify it for a density bonus, that the overall design will be more compatible with prevailing views about what works in the neighborhood, which we had less control over with North Magnolia, because we didn't have objective standards that we could use to push the project in directions that would improve the overall design, even with the 4th story.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Carroll.
One issue, and this is my 3rd time through this presentation, and it does get shorter, which is unusual. Things tend to go the other way. But one question that occurs to me, I'm curious about, because you mentioned it about the 200 block project, and it came up, I think, during the North Magnolia, where if we had allowed them to eliminate the commercial space, it would have lowered the ceilings by a foot, I think, from 10 to 9 feet. Is that a state law that commercial has to be 10 feet, or?
No, that is not. I mean, commercial, if you want viable, leasable commercial, and you don't want empty storefronts, you really want to have more than 10 feet. But it's more, you need more height for commercial than you do for residential.
Okay, so it's not a requirement.
No.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, and also the considerations by the Heritage Preservation Board and the Planning Commission were included in the updated document. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. And I just had 2 minor points. I think, you know, there is definitely a lot of detail, and it's been well explained. So kind of to I keep saying Councilmember, Vice Mayor Candel's point about, you know, the possibility of a 4th story in the downtown, or really when you get density bonuses. You were as a use case running through North Magnolia, or I'm sorry, that was part of the question. And it sounded to me like to some extent height cannot be controlled, but what the objective design standards does is it comes back with possible massing, materials, cadence, setbacks, and everything else. So when I recall how this chamber was full of angry people, there were lots of reasons why people didn't like North Magnolia, but perhaps what this document, what this will do is take a project like that and say, look, we see that you're pushing this, for a return that we can't see in a pro forma, but we're going to try to ensure conformity. So I think a lot of this is about conformity to existing design, within the limits of SB 35 and AB 234 and all the other state mandates that are challenging for some municipalities. And that was very long, but is that correct? Or maybe you can say it shorter.
No, I think that's really well stated. I mean, that's kind of where we're at this point. I mean, the idea of the odds in general is to provide standards for those types of buildings that do seek that bonus and that seek the SB 35 path. That is the intent.
Okay, because I do feel like I want to have an answer. I mean, that was a very difficult public hearing, and I was participating in this process. The second clarification is in the agenda tonight, the statement said the Larkspur odds allows developers more flexibility than the county toolkit, and I think you covered that, but I know we spent many hours on this, so maybe a minute to clarify what that means, because I think that's significant.
Yeah, no, that's great. So the way that the Marin County odds toolkit is structured is it doesn't deal so much in setbacks and form-based code. It deals in building typologies, like you have a duplex, you have a fourplex, you have a courtyard building, and then you're asked to apply an architectural style to it, whether it's contemporary or Tudor. And I think they had maybe 5 or 6 different styles, which included craftsman. But the problem with applying those styles is a developer that comes up to it will do it exactly like it's asked to be done. And they'll do it that way every time because they want to get ministerial approval. And what you're going to do is you're going to get a very cheap example of one type of craftsman over and over and over again, for instance. And craftsman styles, I mean, there's like hundreds of different ways to do craftsman houses. And also craftsman, for instance, doesn't scale up really well to a large multifamily. That's not what it's intended for. So instead of taking the route of just dealing with the way a building looks, we strip that away. I think, the architecture itself, you can put all of the controls you want, and a bad architect will make a bad building. It'll be a bad craftsman building. But we would really want to try to legislate, the setbacks from the road and the height and the bulk of the building. And the style will be what it is, as long as the materials are handled in a good manner, which is to say that a material change can't be at an outside corner. It has to be an inside corner, because that is how traditional construction is done, as one example. So we've gone away from typologies and moved towards a more traditional form-based approach.
David, thank you so much. Any other questions? I think we'll take it to the public for public comment. Any public comments in the chamber? Anybody want to ask a question or make a comment about the objective design standards? Okay, we'll come back in case you're formulating your thoughts. Anybody on Zoom? Okay. Okay. Welcome.
James Holmes, Larkspur. If ever anybody proposed on the Lucky site a structure such as the example given, you can well imagine the uproar, and it would dwarf what happened in North Magnolia. I really wonder how many people are aware of what's in this proposal, and they might be surprised if they knew. But in addition to the sizes allowed, I am concerned because the document largely omitted the design guidelines in the Uniform County proposal, and thus I think we don't have a really very good idea of what the buildings will look like. as implemented under this proposal. The idea of deleting the requirements was that they were unduly prescriptive and didn't ensure good design, which may be true, but I wonder if we aren't going to the other extreme, and I wonder if laissez-faire is really much better. Almost every good-looking multi-family building in Larkspur is the product of design review. The developer's first shot is very seldom his best shot. If the state won't let us do design review, then should we really give up design control to the extent that we are here? Additionally, if other jurisdictions have more extensive design controls, developers may bring their cheaper, plainer designs to Larkspur. Please keep in mind that many of the buildings under this regimen will be large and tall and will be approved ministerially without public input. The Planning Commission seemed to believe that more detailed guidelines would just be subject to waivers and concessions anyway. But I don't believe that justifies essentially surrender at the outset, as also the county consultants believe. This complete lack of design guidelines or architectural guidelines is a bit of a leap in the dark that is not required by state law and should be approached with great caution and possibly reconsidered. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your comment, James. Next comment, please. Welcome.
Yeah, this is Johnson Reynolds. I live in the canal and I have a condo there. I know I'm not in Larkspur, but I've been around Marin County, and I'm part of MOC, Marin Organizing Committee. I'm concerned that we accommodate people, low-income people, people of color, working people, not only working people, workforce people. And these standards come out from the state. The SB 35 is concerned that we accommodate people that need to be accommodated. So there's not so many people traveling from other parts of the Bay Area to do their work. We want to have more people that are working and living in Larkspur and other jurisdictions in the county, so they don't have to travel from other parts of the Bay Area. And so those standards are important. I think objective standards are, of course, important too. The architectural standards, the open space, having several facilities in a place, not just a big house there. That's a concern I have too. So, these objective standards, the architectural styles, and the open space and the setbacks, we can do that, but we don't want to deny the possibility of having low income and people of color and seniors being denied living in our Larkspur as well as the other jurisdictions. So I know there's no public review of this in many cases but we have to accommodate people. So thank you.
Great, thank you for your comment. Anybody else on Zoom or anybody else in the room want to comment on the objective design standards? Okay, so why don't we bring it back to the council, and we have the recommendation, I think, to a motion or to, I'm sorry.
An amendment that we'd like to propose to the ordinance to address some issues that the city attorney raised, as well as a comment that was raised by the attorney for the sewer agency site.
Okay. Yep.
So I don't know, pass them to you first.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so it looks like we have a full page, about a third from the very end there, or second from the end rather. There's an exhibit after that. Yeah. Do you want to maybe at least give us a little bit of
Let me
some context
go
here?
through some of them. So the first change just recommends striking some language that just, I guess, clarifies that this is going to apply to projects, or this particular section that applied to SB 35 projects applies when someone's subject to SB 35, but doesn't necessarily replace all the other Larkspur procedures, because they could elect to go through some of the other processes that are in the other zoning code or the Title 18. The second change deletes some text regarding CEQA not applying to projects under SB 35, because CEQA may apply to some projects if they're not, or if there's some exemptions under SB 35. There's several renumbering items that are in here that are not substantive changes. And then we are recommending adding text to 20.01.0501F, so that there's a new subsection that says the review authority is the planning director or the planning commission. And that text that follows is similar to text that's already in the document for non-SB 35 projects. There's some more renumbering. There's some text that's recommended to be clarified so that it's not referring to subdivisions of parcels, but just parcels that are being divided into design sites. There's a correction in a label, a reference to a figure so that it's correct. And then the one substantive change would be on page 75, where it's referring to the larger sites. It's the district that's near Larkspur Landing. The recommendation is to change the minimum open space, the minimum dimensions for open space from 30 feet in any direction to 30 feet in one direction and no less than 10 feet in any other direction, so that there's more flexibility for the open space size and or the way it's oriented. And on that same page 75, it would be clarifying that fire access areas that are required to be unobstructed may double as open space and pedestrian pathway. And that was a change that was considered by the Planning Commission, and they were okay with that. And the other changes are just corrections. And then there's another reference like that, just to clarify that fire access could double as the open space. And that summarizes the recommendations. So staff is recommending first that you adopt a resolution to make the objective design standards consistent with the general plan, the current general plan, as well as the downtown Larkspur specific plan and the central Larkspur specific plan. And then second, to introduce the ordinance by title only and waive further reading with the amendments that we're proposing tonight.
Okay, so just Sky real quick. I mean, you know, having heard what, you know, Elise said, you know, some of these things like renumbering text and, you know, defining like parcel or design site differently don't seem to matter. But there were a few that might merit a little bit of discussion and maybe public input. So what are your thoughts?
There's no legal requirement that council continue the item for further input or further planning commission consideration. The planning director and I went over these and felt that where there are somewhat substantive changes, they're either reflective of the intent that was already in place and are just clarifying, like making sure who the review authority is for projects that qualify for ministerial processing under SB 35. It just was, we think it was there, but it just wasn't as clear as it could have been who the reviewing authority was. And the other ones are fairly minor changes to provide greater flexibility or make minor changes or clarifications. So certainly council can continue this for further public review. It's not legally required, and I know, if I'm remembering correctly, there was some grant-related deadline, but I don't remember what that was for action on this.
There is a grant-related deadline of September 30th for taking action on some piece of the objective standards. And if there's something that you're wary of, any specific amendment that we're proposing to, those could be stricken to come. This will need to come back to the Planning Commission again at the future. Even the map has some blank areas that need to be filled in. So it'll be returning again to the Planning Commission, and we can include them there if there's anything that you're concerned about including in this version or this first one.
Okay, so maybe I'll look to other council members for their thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm not concerned. I trust staff on this matter. I trust the city attorney is doing, and our community services director has done the due diligence on these amendments. So I'm fine with them as they are, and I appreciate you making sure they're clear in advance. I don't think we need to continue it. I would be interested in passing ordinance 1072.
Okay, Vice Mayor.
If that motion were made, I would second.
I move that we pass ordinance number.
Sorry, let me just get input. I mean, I'm happy to do that in a second, but Councilmember Carroll, any thoughts?
Yeah, just a quick note. Having heard both the Planning Commission and the Heritage Preservation's input on this, have we gotten any feedback from developers or architects yet? And I assume at some point we will when this passes.
I'm sharing it with people that have been expressing interest in developing some of the sites that are on the draft housing element sites inventory. So, and they haven't, the one comment that we did receive tonight was from Attorney Riley Hurd that represents the Ross Valley Sanitary District. He's really been the only one that's been providing any recommended modifications. The others have been just sort of I've been keeping them informed of the process, and they haven't submitted any comments.
Okay, but the bottom line is this is not written in stone.
It's an ordinance. It can be modified, just like ordinances can be modified.
Great, thank you. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for your patience. Councilmember Way, if you want to make a motion.
And then just to clarify, the motion should first be to adopt resolution 5323, since the changes to the general plan and specific plans need to be made first. And then the second motion would be to introduce by title and waive further reading ordinance 1072.
Okay, I'll do that. Exactly what you said.
I will second that first motion that Catherine just made.
Okay.
Is that doable if I say it that way?
I'll just repeat it that the first motion is to adopt resolution 5323.
I will second that motion.
Okay. Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Carroll?
Aye.
Councilmember White?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kendall?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Coleman?
Yes. Thank you.
And then the second would be?
To introduce by title and waive further reading of ordinance 1072.
Right. Introduce by title and waive further reading of ordinance 1072. I move that.
I will second that.
Okay, roll call, please.
Councilmember Carroll?
Yes.
Councilmember White?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kendall?
Yes.
Mayor Coleman?
Yes.
Good job, Elise.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for all that. And again, thank you to staff and to everyone else working on, including Councilmember Way, who's jumped in here at the end.
Well, just wait, before we close this item, did I say that correctly with the amendments? I didn't say it with the amendments.
I think that it was clear from the community development director's statement, but you know, why don't we just go ahead and why don't we do it again just to make sure for the record? I apologize to everyone that since I was the one assisting, that the motion would be to introduce by title and waive further reading of ordinance 1023 with the amendments presented at the meeting tonight.
Wait, okay, waive and for the reading of ordinance 1072. I think that was the number we were talking about.
Yes, thank you.
And including the revisions that were presented tonight on 9/6/23 in 7.1 attachment 2.
I will second that new motion.
Just want to make sure the attachment was included.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Carroll?
Yes.
Councilmember Ray?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kendall?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you again. So that concludes our public hearing, and we can now move on to the last item on the agenda, the business item 8.1, rent stabilization. So council to consider waiving second reading and adopting the ordinance as introduced on July 19th. Last time we discussed this, July 19th of 2023. Could we get a staff report, or I know we've talked about this a lot, but let's do it.
I'll be very, very brief, Mr. Mayor. This is, as you've just noted, it's the second reading on an ordinance that the council passed for first reading previously. The key 3 points are outlined in the staff report on the second page in terms of what this rent stabilization ordinance would implement. One is that rent may not be increased more than 5% plus CPI or 7%, whichever is lower. The other thing is that it establishes a process for a landlord to petition for a fair rate of return. And then lastly, it does empower the council to charge a fee to administer this program. And I highlight the last one only because we're waiting to see what you do this evening. And if you pass the ordinance this evening, we'll be coming back with implementation reports. We've started the process of interviewing third-party support that we would need, but did not want to presume the passage of the ordinance before we put that presentation together. So I also understand from talking to some of the other jurisdictions that we'll probably be now kind of out in the lead, I suppose you'd say, in terms of implementation with some of the challenges occurring in Fairfax. They've sort of put a lot of their work on pause to see how their election goes. And in fact, they're having discussion this evening on this topic as well. So that might be where there's considerable crowd right now. And so I'll continue to be working with our staff should you pass this ordinance in terms of implementation. I'll also continue to be speaking with the other jurisdictions about what they are and are not interested in cooperating in terms of implementation, because it's not just the ordinance, and we've talked a lot about something like the rent registry. There's getting resources for folks to be able to just make a phone call and get information. And I'm hearing even from cities that are not debating this particular topic that they're getting more phone calls than they have in the past. And so I think there's some great opportunities for shared resources along those lines. I'll pass it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you for that. So I know that we've deliberated this for a very long time, and I'll bring it back to council for any comments. And I know some people here in the audience and maybe on Zoom want to make public comment, and there were some comments submitted online as well. So in the interest of time, if we bring it back to council, any comments on this ordinance?
Ask a clarifying question.
Yes, please.
The staff report.
Councilmember Way.
So it's your understanding that Fairfax has now put the matter on hold until, because the ballot measure has enough qualifying signatures for it to be a ballot measure?
In my discussions with them, those ordinances are law in Fairfax. Right. I don't think they're moving as rapidly with some of the behind the scenes implementation procedures, recognizing that the final resolution of their debate has yet to occur. So what I'm specifically speaking to is some of the administrative procedure that I think make these types of ordinances run more smoothly. They may only do what they need to administer the law, but not necessarily invest yet in some of the larger resources that would be helpful until they're certain what the final outcome is of their situation.
And do we know if the petitioners have qualified an overturning of their ordinance on the ballot for November or for the March?
I'm hearing November.
November.
But this November?
Yeah.
24.
No, 24.
Oh, 24.
I think that the council, Fairfax decided to put it in the general election.
So my understanding, ongoing discussions are occurring between the stakeholders in Fairfax and the council. I think that's why they have an agenda item this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Please. Sky, quick question for you. When we asked this, maybe I didn't fully understand it. I was under the impression that we were capping rent at 7%, if a property owner needed to go over 7%, they had to submit some type of documentation to prove why they needed that. My understanding was, let's say somebody had to put on decks or roofs or whatever it was, they could submit a, I don't know, an invoice, hey, I got to put in 12 decks and this is what it costs me. And this, and that would be sufficient. It was brought to my attention that it may require more paperwork, such as an independent analysis of how much profit they're making in order to show that it was necessary. And I was just trying to clarify the ordinance that we've put forth. What is the burden on a property owner if they do have to do some type of renovation? What type of documentation or proof is required that they produce in order for that to be considered by us?
So the standard in the ordinance, and I'm just trying to find the right place to report this accurately. Is that the application to exceed the 7% cap does require some degree of documentation, including an independent report to provide the city manager with a basis to evaluate whether or not the costs that were incurred that the property owner is alleging justify exceeding the cap are actually necessary for the property owner to receive a fair rate of return. And then additionally, the city manager can seek the assistance of a consultant retained by the city to evaluate that depending on the level of complexity of the information submitted. But it's not simply, it's more than just submitting the receipts for the construction work. It does require an independent verification where somebody has reviewed the financials of the property, looked at the costs incurred, looked at what's necessary in terms of rent to produce a reasonable rate of return for the property owner, and then verified that the proposed rent increase that exceeds 7% is necessary to achieve that fair rate of return.
And when you say an independent person, is this the property owner's bookkeeper or accountant, or does it have to be some third-party expert or something like that?
It has to be. It can be anybody. I believe it can be anybody that the property owner chooses, but the city manager does retain the discretion to then hire a consultant on behalf of the city to then look at that documentation to verify, to inform the city manager that the analysis is correct. So it does indirectly encourage property owners to produce a report that's actually going to withstand the scrutiny of somebody that the city manager might retain to do an analysis to inform the city manager.
And if the city manager decides to retain an outside expert, who ends up paying for that?
The property owner.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Just because you're on that question, it was suggested in one of the public comments. So I think we're referring to, the ordinance here is 1067 and it's section 6.20.060A. And at the very bottom, last sentence, it says, it includes, fair rate return includes providing an independent financial report and verified financial data. And it was suggested to say credible financial statement and documentation. Is that legally different? Would that language be substitutable? On the ordinance, I'm on page 4 of 9. It's 6.2.060.
I guess this is a matter of discretion for the council, but I would say that if you make that change tonight, you would have to reintroduce the ordinance and then it would have to come back for another reading. The way state law works for ordinances, once the ordinance has been introduced, the council has to either adopt it in exactly the form it was introduced or make changes and then go through the process again. I think the city manager has some additional comments.
Yeah, I want to make sure we have some perspective on what the concept is behind this part of the law. There's an assumption when you introduce rent stabilization that a landlord builds into rent some amount of money that they're collecting to do normal repairs and maintenance. And part of the purpose of rent stabilization when someone petitions for a fair rate of return is that they are arguing to the city that they've incurred an extraordinary expense. And the council, I would submit that the city is not prepared to accept at face value that every landlord that walks in is going to say their expense was extraordinary, wasn't considered in the rent, and it should be allowed that the rent should be increased. I mean, otherwise you sort of have defeated a significant purpose of rent stabilization. If you're talking about the example of one unit that's in the particular public comment, probably won't need to retain a third party to analyze one unit. If you're talking about 400 units and amortized costs over a decade or two, I probably do need some support to do a proper analysis of that.
Okay, thank you. So if I can just paraphrase what I understood there, the exact wording that you have, which is independent financial report, is really to try to codify that discretion to the city manager for, you know, I guess nowhere in here is it saying if it's 1 unit or 400 units, but it's just, I think the spirit intent of the law is to ensure that this is not somehow passing on routine costs as something that requires an extra, you know, increase in rent.
I'm not going to use the word routine, but I'm going to go back to there's a difference between businesses preparing for what would be considered the need to deal with maintenance and repair, and then extraordinary examples like the state passing a law that all balconies need to be brought to a new standard. That latter example is extraordinary circumstance. The former may not be, and may, you know, comes into the subjectivity of what routine means. So, you know, we particularly chose this ordinance because we actually thought it gave staff a better ability to work with the landlord versus other ordinances, which were highly prescriptive and restrictive in how this process would be done. This gives the city manager and his staff the ability to sit down with the landlord, figure out if the submission is reasonable enough that the staff can interpret it, or if we do need somebody who's more versed in the economics of renting property to take a look at it.
Okay, I appreciate the answer. Any other questions? Or yes, please, Vice Mayor.
Sorry, a question based on what the mayor asked earlier. You know, I'm inclined, I'd like to try to pass this tonight if we can. It's a second reading. But having said that, I'm getting calls and emails and meetings about things that people are bringing up that may deserve attention, but probably should have been brought up a long time ago. So my question is, if we were to pass this tonight and then 3 months from now, you know, we stick it on the agenda and say, hey, now that it's been in place for 3 months, are there any things we want to tweak and any things that, you know, maybe we want to modify? Is that a bad plan?
I'm not sure how I can answer that. I mean, what you're saying is I'd want to put this into law and then maybe do a check-in in some amount of time.
Correct.
And based on that check-in, might want to introduce amendments and go through the hearing process.
And aren't we likely to, when you come back to us with the administrative procedures, I'm sure there's going to reopen a whole nother set of questions as to, I mean, in other words, you're not going to present us with a fait accompli. We'll have a lot of discussion, and I imagine robust discussion on what background administrative procedures that we do. So this is going to be an ongoing topic, is what I'm trying to get to.
Yes, but again, we particularly chose our model that we used after looking at these ordinances up and down the state to try to give a lot of discretion to staff to work with tenants and landlords without having to keep coming back to the council for administrative procedures. What we do need to talk about with you that's most significant is the establishment of collection of data and any associated fees, right? The rental registry. So that's a big ticket item that we need to talk about with the council. But the way this ordinance is crafted, you are giving the staff considerable discretion to work on the implementation of a lot of the other processes. I don't plan on doing that in a vacuum, but I think one of the elegances of this particular approach that I compliment Oxnard, which was the city I was influenced a lot talking to, is it has kept them from having to constantly be back in front of the council and having a lot of public meetings. It's allowed the staff to sort things out with the players involved.
Okay, thank you.
Can I?
Your meetings, boy.
Can I ask Vice Mayor Kendall, are some of the concerns you've heard more recently new concerns that we have? Because we've had.
Yeah, I mean, so some things I think, there are, hypothetically, people who may own, I mean, one of the public comments, for example, was somebody who owns a 1-unit residential condo, which is not excluded and is part of this and, is a potential financial hardship. And we didn't really talk about, do we want to exclude, single family residences or anything like that. I don't want to talk about it now because I want to, move forward. But I'm just saying at some point, I think we're going to get comments. We should all take notes, and then 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, we check in and say, okay, how is it going? Did we forget anybody? Did we overdo it? Did we underdo it? And just revisit. That's my gut. But again, I would defer to council and staff as to how we go forward.
I would only comment because I don't know the volume of emails that or phone calls you're getting. Most of what staff's seen is actually not about rent stabilization. It's been about eviction protections, which you did already pass. I don't want this to sound like an editorial comment. It's just been pure surprise on the part of your city manager how many people, I guess, have been sort of assuming that at some point they would use a just cause eviction provision as sort of a final action before they would sell a property. So that seems to be the most common concern I'm getting is, well, I was always planning on using that eviction procedure when I was ready to sell the property. And frankly, I don't think we had that discussion about whether that was something you wanted to allow or not allow. So.
Okay, any other comments before we go to the public? Okay, why don't we take public comment? We'll start here in the chamber. Anyone who wants to speak, come on up to the mic. This clock isn't working tonight. I trust we can use my phone here. Okay, so we'll go to Zoom and then we'll come back. Sasha, anybody on Zoom? I'm trying to get my timer queued up here. No, come on. Okay. Well, then maybe not. Come back to the chamber one last time. Last call. All right. We have a taker and you have 2 minutes. And I have a clock.
Hi, can you hear me? Pull it up. I'm Ann Clark, Larkspur Courts. Excuse me. My topic is the reasonable rate of return. Rental investors, whether they are mom and pop or multifamily corporate landlord, make their profit or a reasonable rate of return in their base rents. As any type of rental investor investing in a prospective property investment, they make sure that the rental property has enough rental income to cover mortgage payments, taxes, operating expenses, and other expenses, but mainly those top three ones. They foresee in their due diligence of the rental property investment any future repairs needed. Rental investments offer a return through rental income and capital appreciation of their property. My question is, what financial particulars are going to be looked at to determine the reasonable rate of return? Income statements, operating costs, profit margins, to prevent these arbitrary rent increases. We need total financials of the purchase price, the payment, a pro forma showing how their landlords would, quantify their rent increases that they need. We need to stem the tide of excessive profits to reasonable profits and get our rent increases stabilized. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your comment. Perfect timing. That was 2 minutes. All right. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Dorothy. I live in Larkspur. I first want to just acknowledge the city manager bringing forward the concern he has about just cause eviction protections. And I respect his need to notify you of the concerns being voiced. And if you would like to talk about that, I just want to make requests that you make it a separate issue, because that was your intention at the outset, is to have these two topics be handled separately. So I hope in your discussion of rent control tonight that you'll keep that as a separate issue. And what I'd like to present is that in witnessing the discussions that have happened, first of all, thank you, all of you, for taking this topic as seriously as you have, to the point of wanting to actually take some kind of action. And I'm very appreciative, Vice Mayor Kendall, that you want to see how it works out, come back, talk again, and that makes sense. And I hope that when you do that, you will be taking into account more of your middle class here in Larkspur. I've heard you talk at length about needing to help the people who are most in need, people who are low income, elderly, disabled. And I've also heard you talk a few times, Mayor Paulson, about how Larkspur is a highly desirable place. And I feel that embedded in that statement is that people should only live here if they're extremely wealthy. And what that presents to me is you're worried about people living here if they are very wealthy, or you'll look out for the very needy. And where do the rest of us fall? So I'd like it if you would please keep that in mind. And the fact that you have pretty much locked in rent control at 7%, really leaves no room for CPI to have any impact at all. So that is really locking us in at a very high, it's still a very high rent increase every year. So it really does make it pretty impossible for middle class people to continue to live reasonably here. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dorothy. All right. Any other public comment? Going once, going twice. Okay, so let's close public comment. Oh, okay, on Zoom.
That's it.
Wow, this is like eBay. Last minute there. All right, let me start my timer, please. Definitely want to hear from you. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Romeo Arrieta with the Marin Association Realtors. I will be brief. I've expressed our association's concern with rent control and these ordinances. I do want to point out, I believe there was part of the discussion about the exempting the ADUs and the JDUs, and I want to thank councils for that. And those are my comments.
All right. Thank you, Romeo. Anybody else?
I would like to move approval of ordinance 1067, adding chapter 6.20 to the Larkspur Municipal Code.
I'll second that. And I think Councilmember Carroll closed public comment for us. So if you want to speak, blame him. All right, so I'll second that motion. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Carroll.
Yes.
Councilmember Way.
No.
Vice Mayor Kendall.
Yes.
Mayor Holden.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And I really want to appreciate, thanks to everybody, all the stakeholders there. You know, we've spent a lot of time, and, you know, I'll reiterate, I think the council's intention is to have something that will, to me, the adage is to keep the landlords in business and to keep renters in their places. And we're working our best to come up with a balance, knowing that subsidies and affordable housing and new construction, everything we went over is part of this. And we will continue to watch this issue. And third thing is also to keep staff sane. You know, we want to not overburden our staff with you know, something that we're building here. So great thanks for all your patience. And, you know, the conversation we know goes on. And that is our last item for tonight. So I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Let's go home. We'll be back in 2 weeks.